Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Basi. Good morning, Ayo. Welcome back.
Good morning, Rotus.
We begin with Sam Bankman-Fried. With, of course, I think Ayo mentioned it right before we went to break. He's sentenced to 25 years in prison. He could actually serve half of that sentence based on credits, good behavior, and so on and so forth. His lawyers wanted 6 years, saying that the money that FTX lost, which is to the tune of almost $10 billion, would be paid back. The judge rejected that. Prosecutors wanted 40 to 50 years, but in the end, it's 25. He has to forfeit about $11 billion in assets, which will be paid over a period of time. So if you want to add it up, Sam Bankman-Fried is about 32 years old. He probably won't come out until he's almost, if he served his full sentence, until he's almost 60 years old. We go to Nigeria, and of course, the big story, the central bank finally coming out with those capital thresholds for banks. And if you take a look at what's on your screen right now, you have what the central bank put out there. So as far as the new requirements are concerned, for commercial banks that have, an international, operate in Nigeria, also have an international presence, we're going to have to put up, the threshold is now 500 billion naira. For national banks that operate, within Nigeria, just within our borders, 200 billion. And then for regional banks that are in the country, but then in particular regions, 50 billion. For the merchant banks at the national level, 50 billion. Non-interest banks at the national level, 20 billion. And for regional banks, non-interest regional banks, 20 billion. Now, of course, the CBN has said that there are particular ways in which the banks can raise this capital. They were referring to paid up capital, for instance, and using rights issues or offers for subscription, and even offering new shares, basically, or private placements to existing shareholders. They said that they cannot use shareholders' funds. So if we take a look at, and which in fact means that they can't use their retained earnings. We were looking at Access Bank yesterday, the 600 billion in after-tax profits that they made. Access Bank declared a 1 naira 80 kobo dividend. Full year dividend came to about 2 naira. So basically, with your after-tax profits, you can either pay out dividends to shareholders and the rest you keep with retained earnings, under the watchful eye of the regulator, the central bank. I mean, the bank basically has to oversee what it is that you're paying out in dividends. So there's been some pushback with respect to the banks not being able to use their retained earnings. And even Mr. Mustafa Chike-Obi, the chair of the Bank Directors Association of Nigeria, BDAN, he actually said that this is not going to work out. He actually feels that the central bank should come out and clarify with respect to whether or not retained earnings can be used. If you look at a table that's been put up from Nairalytics, which is the research arm of Nairametrics, you will see how this actually breaks down for the banks according to their analysis. So if you look at what the central bank is using, the share capital plus premium, you can see the numbers for each of the banks. So for example, Access Bank, they have an estimate, and that's in billion, by the way, 251 billion. You can see their retained earnings. If you included Access Bank's retained earnings, they are well above the threshold, because the requirement is, the CBN target is 500 billion. But because the central bank is excluding retained earnings, this would mean that Access Bank would have to raise the difference between 500 to 251. And you can go down the line. EcoBank, FBNH, FCMB, Fidelity, GTB, Stanbic, so on and so forth. They cannot add the retained earnings to meet that target. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around that, because basically when you're going out to raise more funds, you are diluting existing shares for existing shareholders in all of these banks. But look, it's been said, the government wants to get to a 1 trillion naira economy. Whether that can be achieved by 2030, I don't think so. But they want essentially to be able to fund big ticket transactions, and they want the banks to be at the center of that. So again, by the way, the banks, it's 2 years. You have 2 years to raise this capital, so they got until 2026. However, the banks have only 30 days until the end of April in order to provide to the Central Bank of Nigeria a plan on how they want to raise this capital to meet that threshold. So whether it's a private placement, whether it's a rights issue, whether it's an offer for subscription, they have to give that. And one of the issues that Mr. Chike-Obi brought up, the chairman of BDAN, was that, hey, listen, for the banks to do that, you have to have an AGM, an annual general meeting. You have to put out a notice for an AGM. So that 30-day period to do this does seem a bit rushed. So this is going to generate a lot of conversations. Very interesting. They put this out right before Easter Friday, and there's a holiday on Monday. But trust that this is a conversation that is going to continue now that we have those numbers. Finally, it's our Friday where we do our Eye on Tech on the Global Business Report. We have just a snippet of a conversation that we had. We'll play the rest of this on the Global Business Report. A conversation I had with the founder and CEO of the Terragon Group, which is a technology company focused on data in Nigeria. It was sparked off by Dr. Bati's comments, actually, with respect to the kidnapped students, in Kaduna, and how there are issues with data counting and so on and so forth. So that conversation flowed into a number of other matters. Here's just a snippet of that. Behind me is not just a beautiful horizon. These are data centers. There's activity happening everywhere across this Victoria Island skyline. So why does Nigeria have a data problem? Most recently, we were celebrating the fact that kidnapped students in Kaduna had been returned back to their parents and their homes. But there was a discrepancy in exactly how many students were kidnapped and how many were returned. Here's Dr. Reuben Abati on the Arise News Morning Show.
What happened to the school authorities who gave us a different number? The school authorities said 287. We're being told 137. We're now being told 131. Why is it so difficult to count human beings in Nigeria? We even do national population census. We don't even know the number of human beings that are in Nigeria. We're just always doing estimates. Over 200 million, over 210 million. It should be possible to know how many we are. And in serious situations like this, we should be more exact.
So for the Global Business Report's Eye on Tech, we decided to speak with the founder and CEO of the Terragon Group, a technology company right here in Lagos, Nigeria, to get his thoughts on Nigeria's data issues and much more. All right, so you heard Dr. Abati's comments, right, when he was, talking about this data issue that we have in Nigeria. Why do we have a data problem? Because I was looking at your Terragon mug, and it says there, where there's data smoke, there's business fire. I guess representing opportunity, right? Absolutely. So, but as a whole, why do we have this data issue in Nigeria?
I think that we're conflating the issues. I don't think, from a technology standpoint, where we play, I think technology is going to solve a lot of the data concerns we have, and that will come from some of the things the government's already doing. So how BVN, NIN, national identity, which is NIN, all of that stuff, being able to link them and linking that to SIM registration and banking information, I think we'll get a true sense of what the issues are. And this also links to other social issues that we're dealing with. What is the catalyst? The catalyst is going to be technology. There have been a lot of things historically that have happened, and we haven't kept records properly. We have come up with numbers, and we've had to continue to defend those numbers in some shape or form. But the reality about technology is it's a big part of it. It's the accuracy that it gives you.
But the disparity, you've got you're in the tech space, you've got so many great Nigerian companies that are using data to reach customer. We'll get to your business model, but the disparity, like the school issue, we don't know how many students were got. Why does that disparity exist? Why do you think it exists?
I think there are areas where I don't have a very, very clear understanding of, right? I think that if somebody goes to a school and takes a bunch of students, I'll use my kids' school as an example. There's a class and there are 5 arms. Typically, the number of students in those arms is between 16 and 20. That's my understanding. So if you multiply that number, you take an average and multiply that number by 5, you get something around 100 students per arm. So if an entire arm disappears, you will know that you have a sense of there's 100 students that have disappeared. There's probably an issue of the information at a level of government is very different from the reality within the school, or there is a huge students are not making it to school, right? So the schools say they register X number of students, and maybe the reality is 20% show up. So I think those are social issues and challenges that need to be dealt with. But there is a limit to what technology can do. Can technology solve that kind of problem? No. If there isn't alignment, if there isn't sincerity of purpose, if there isn't a commitment to do it, then technology cannot work magic. It's going to be a sheer case of rubbish in and rubbish out.
Yeah. All right, so we talked about so much more: ghost workers, the jackpot issues with talent, and so much more. So you'll get to see the rest of that, and that is our update for this Good Friday.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rotus. Just very quickly, like you highlighted, big concern there, but with regards to the new directions on directives of the CBN, does it perhaps demonstrate that when it comes to the banking sector in Nigeria, we've grown from the requirement of the 25 billion capital base to now 500 billion? Is that an indication of growth, or is it a bit not very realistic, or other factors involved in terms of the numbers of the capital base expected in 2 years? And then just a bit of clarity for banks who would apply for their licenses post the April deadline given, April 2024 deadline given. Will they immediately have to meet the criteria given by the CBN? That's one. And then the second aspect of that is obviously that great interview you just had there with the Terragon boss, MD. And just to say that I believe that when it comes to data in Nigeria, it is not an impossible task. It's not something that is impossible to achieve. As always, if there's a will to do it, because we have a lot of these data collection, we had the NIMC, we had different things there, NIN, so many things on there, but it seems like we do not have a collation challenge or using technology to make the process seamless, and then bringing all of them into one space seems to be the big task or challenge ahead of us. But like he mentioned, it's very possible, and I think it's something that we ought to take very seriously as a nation.
Well, Rotus, let's start with some.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah. So go ahead, Dr. Bath. I thought
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to respond to her very quickly. Okay. So on the. But look, if the three of us, just to make this very practical, if I or Dr. Abate and myself wanted to start a bank, we'll say, okay, where are we going to operate? Are we regional? Are we national? Or do we want to go international? Or do we want to be a merchant bank or non-interest bank? The same CBN has stated it. So we know what we want to be. So whatever category we fit into, that's the capital threshold that we will have to meet. And so we will have to submit our plan to the central bank before the end of April as to how we plan to raise that capital to reach that threshold. And yes, Ayo, it is a indication of growth from, 2004, 2005, the last exercise we had up until now. So those capital thresholds have to reflect, especially if you use dollar terms, dollar back then and today. So, yeah. Okay,
let's start with Sam Bankman-Fried, who got fried by the court, in New York. He was convicted in November 2023, and the jurors didn't find his explanation convincing. And so yesterday was fixed for the sentencing. His own attorneys were they were recommending leniency, 5 to 6 years, but the attorneys, the prosecution attorneys, wanted, in fact, 50 years, 40 to 50 years, but he got 25 years. And as you have said, he may probably not spend up to 25 years, given the nature of the penal system in the United States. However, the people who are not happy at all are those customers who lost their deposits. And of course, the Judge Louis Kaplan, was also very harsh. He was not impressed by any of the arguments, and he said, look, this man will do this thing again in the future because he has not seen any remorse. He more or less called him a liar. And I think that, this case is one of the largest, financial frauds in the history of the United States. And perhaps, Sam Bankman-Fried's case should be a case study for, students in the financial sector and also for persons, practitioners within that particular field. He's been slammed with, a fine of, is it 11 billion, that should be forfeited, to the United States government. But the bigger issue will be what happens to depositors who are very unhappy, the victims who are very unhappy, who are hoping that when bankruptcy is declared, they will manage to get their money back. As for the Central Bank of Nigeria, well, you recall that the bank governor had been talking about the objective of a 1 trillion naira, or is it $1 trillion, focus in terms of economic growth. Now, they came up with the measures yesterday in terms of recapitalization. With shareholders' funds not part of it, there is no bank, practically, as that your data shows, that has up to 500 billion, relying on just, the threshold defined by government in terms of paid-up capital and share premium. So the question there is, which bank will remain in business after this deadline? We've been told there are options of mergers and acquisitions, IPOs, public offers, and all of that, private placements. Those are the options that the CBN is recommending. So who will be left? Because even the big banks will have to struggle with this. Then they've given a deadline of 1 month to come up with implementation plans. Now, how would they arrive at those implementation plans if they don't have board meetings? Would they unilaterally, the banks, go ahead and do it? And it is a fact that any bank that is seeking license from April 1, 2024 will have to go with the defined, capital base that the CBN has put forward. But the implications for the banking industry is important. Beyond the CBN talking about growth and deepening financial intermediation. So we look forward to see who will remain. Although they've been told, the banks have been told that some of them can downgrade their licenses. So maybe at the end of the day, we'll see some of the banks downgrading from big bank to smaller bank or to non-interest bank. So interesting days ahead. Thank you very much, Rotus.